was the father of the ranger who died with my name on his lips. I let myself smile just once when I recognized the voice of the man who'd just called me a glorified taxi driver. I was 29 the night the dust storm over Helmand swallowed a convoy whole, and I'd been 26 the first time I'd held an Apache stick over a real firefight. People who don't fly think helicopters are noisy and slow. They've never sat in the front seat at 200 feet above a tree line at night watching their gunner work, feeling the airframe shudder when the cannon goes hot. I loved that machine more than I'd ever loved anything that walked on two legs. My mother said that was the sad part about me. She wasn't wrong. My name is Hollis Breyer. I grew up outside Lubbock, Texas, the only child of a single mother who waited tables at a Cracker Barrel off I-27, and a father whose name I learned for the first time when I had to fill out my Army enlistment paperwork. I was tall by the time I was 13. Taller than most boys, with my mother's red hair and a habit of saying exactly what I meant. That last part got me into more trouble than the height ever did. I joined the Army at 18 because my high school guidance counselor told me girls like me didn't go to college, and the recruiter at the strip mall office told me girls like me could fly. He turned out to be the only adult in my life who'd ever told me the truth. I flew Apaches with the 101st out of Fort Campbell for 6 years. I deployed 3 times. I came home twice with everything I'd left with. The third time I came home in a chair with a piece of titanium in my left femur and a memory I didn't talk about for a long time. The memory had a name. The name was Reaper 6. That was my call sign, and it was the call sign Sergeant First Class Tate Whitlock set into his radio the night he died. I'd left the Army by the time the brass put me up for the citation. I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Clarksville, Tennessee, paying $850 a month, working part-time at a Lowe's, helping people pick out bathroom tile. The VA paid for the leg. The Army paid for the citation. Nobody paid for the dreams, but I'd stopped expecting anybody would. The letter from the Pentagon came in a manila envelope in late August. They wanted me back. Not to fly, to attend something. A ceremony, the letter said, in October at Fort Belvoir, where the Army Aviation Hall of Fame was inducting 3 new names, and one of them was mine. I read the letter twice, sitting on my kitchen floor with my dog Bo's head in my lap, and then I called my mother and told her, and she cried, and then I cried, and then we sat on the phone not saying anything for about 20 minutes. The way she and I always did when something was too big for words. I drove up to Virginia in my old Tacoma. Bo came with me. He was 7 years old by then, a brindlemont I'd adopted from a shelter in Oak Grove the week I got out of Walter Reed, and he didn't like being left alone. I didn't either, if I was honest. We stayed at a Hampton Inn off Route 1 the night before the ceremony, and I lay on the bed in my flight suit, which I hadn't worn in 3 years, and I tried to remember how to be the woman who'd worn it. The morning of the ceremony, I drove on to Belvoir at 08:30. The MP at the gate looked at my ID, then looked at me, then looked at the ID again. He was maybe 22 years old. He said, "Ma'am, are you the Hollis Breyer?" I said I was. He saluted me. I'd forgotten what that felt like. It felt like getting hit in the chest with something warm. The ceremony was at the Army Aviation Museum, which had been moved to Belvoir from Fort Rucker 2 years before. I parked in the visitor's lot and walked across the asphalt with Bo on a leash beside me, because the woman who'd written me the official letter had said yes when I asked if I could bring him, and because Bo is a service dog now, registered and vested. Since the dreams got bad enough that the VA gave me a piece of paper saying so. There was a reception in the rotunda before the ceremony. Officers in dress blues, a few in mess dress, wives in pearls, a couple of senators' aides making small talk over coffee. I recognized maybe 3 faces. I'd been gone a long time. I kept Bo close to my left leg, and I worked the room the way my old company commander had taught me to, which is to say, I stood in one place and let people come to me. That's when I heard the laugh. It was a particular kind of laugh. Wet, loud, the kind that announces itself before the joke is finished. It came from a knot of 3 men by the window, all in dress blues, one of them a full colonel with the green tab of a ranger officer. He had a glass of something amber in his hand, and he was talking to a younger man in an aviator's tabs, and another officer I didn't recognize. "And they expect me to stand up and applaud," the colonel was saying. 3 inductees, and one of them flew a goddamn taxi. I mean, no disrespect. You guys are great, but it's aviation. Hauling our boys around. Glorified chauffeurs. Real soldiers do the work on the ground. The aviator laughed politely the way junior officers laugh at full colonels. The other officer didn't laugh at all. He was looking at his shoes. I stood very still and I let the words land. Glorified chauffeurs, real soldiers do the work on the ground. I'd heard variations of that sentence my entire career. From infantry lieutenants who'd never been shot at, from special forces NCOs who'd never seen the sky from a cockpit, from men whose lives I had personally saved and who would not look me in the eye on the ground because I was a woman, and I flew a helicopter, and they could not square those two facts with their idea of what war looked like. I knew the colonel's voice. I'd never met him, but I knew the voice. I'd heard it once before, on a satellite phone, the night before my third deployment, when a ranger sergeant had called me from Bagram and said his old man wanted to say hi to the pilot his boy had been telling so many stories about. The father had been gruff and friendly and a little drunk. He'd said, "Take care of my boy up there, ma'am." He'd called Meme. I'd liked him. I walked across the rotunda with Bo at my heel. The colonel saw me coming. His eyes did the thing men's eyes do when they realize they've been overheard, which is, they get very bright and very wary at the same time. He smiled the smile of a man who is about to apologize without apologizing. "Major," he said. He'd read my rank off my flight suit. "Didn't see you there." "Colonel," I said, "was just telling these guys about my old unit. No offense intended to aviation." "None taken," I said. He relaxed a quarter of an inch. He had a wide, weathered face, salt in his hair, and eyes that were so pale a blue they were almost gray. They were the same eyes I'd seen in a small photograph on a small folding cart at a funeral I'd not been allowed to attend because I'd been in a hospital bed in Landstuhl with a titanium rod in my leg and a doctor telling me I wasn't going anywhere for 6 weeks. "You here for the ceremony?" the colonel asked. He was making the small talk now, doing the recovery, and the younger aviator was smiling because he thought the danger had passed. "I'm one of the inductees," I said. His glass paused on the way to his mouth. "You don't say," he said. He recovered fast. He looked at the patch on my shoulder, at the wings on my chest, at the small subdued ribbon over my left pocket that meant Distinguished Flying Cross with V device. "Apaches?" "Yes, sir." "Where'd you fly out of?" "Campbell, 101st. 3 chores. 3. He nodded the slow nod of a man trying to figure out how to reverse course without being seen reversing. He glanced at Bo. Bo looked back at him steadily. Bo was very good at looking at people steadily. It is part of his job. "Well," the colonel said. "Major, glad to have you. Didn't mean anything by what I said." "I'm sure you didn't, sir." He smiled. The smile was a peace offering. I let him hold it out for a second. "What's your call sign, Major?" he asked. He asked it the way he'd ask anything in that room. Friendly. A little patronizing. The way a man asks a woman a question when he's trying to put a soft landing on something he doesn't want to admit was a hard takeoff. The younger aviator was already smiling, ready for whatever cute thing I was about to say, ready to be charmed. I let the question sit in the air for the count of 2. "Reaper 6, I said. The colonel's glass stopped moving altogether. I have replayed that moment in my head more times than I can count. The way his pale eyes went, first wide, then unfocused, then wet at the corners in a way men in dress blues are not allowed to let their eyes get in public. The way his mouth worked around a word that didn't come out. The way his hand, the one holding the glass, began to shake so finely you'd miss it if you weren't looking. I was looking. The younger aviator didn't know what was happening. He looked at the colonel, then at me, then back at the colonel. He said, "Sir, are you all right?" The colonel didn't answer him. "Whitlock," the colonel said. He said it like a man identifying a body. "Yes, sir," I said. "Sergeant First Class Tate Whitlock, 2nd Battalion, 75th, killed in action March 19th, 2020, in Konar Province. He was on my net the night he died." The colonel set his glass down on the windowsill behind him because his hand could not hold it anymore. The other officer, the one who hadn't laughed, stepped quietly back, the way men do when they realize they're standing on private ground. "You were Reaper 6, the colonel said. "I was Reaper 6. He looked at me a long time. There was a moment when I thought he might break, right there in the rotunda, in front of God and 100 officers and the bronze bust of General Howe's. But he was a ranger and a colonel and the father of a son, and he did not break. He just stood there with his pale eyes wet and his hand on the windowsill, and he looked at me like a man who has been waiting 4 years to see a face he never expected to see. "He talked about you," he said. His voice had gone soft. "Every time he came home, Hollis, the lady who flew the gunship. He said you were the best stick in the regiment. He was being kind, sir." He wasn't. Tate wasn't kind. He was honest. I had not cried about Tate Whitlock in 2 years, and I was not going to cry about him in a rotunda in front of his father. I swallowed it. I felt Bo press against my left calf, the way he does when he can feel my heart rate change, which is one of the things he is trained for, and which is the reason the VA gave him to me. He told me, "The night we lost him," I said. "His radio was open the whole time. We were trying to get to them. The weather was bad, sandstorm coming in off the wadi. The mountain was eating our line of sight," he said. I stopped. The colonel was looking at me, and I realized that this was the thing he had wanted to know for 4 years and never been able to ask. They give you the citation. They give you the folded flag. They do not give you the last words. The last words are classified, and they are the property of the people who heard them, and the people who heard them do not always come to the funeral. I had not come to the funeral. He said, "Reaper 6, you tell my dad I was where I was supposed to be." The colonel made a sound. It was not a sob. It was the sound a man makes when something inside him that has been very tightly wounded for a very long time releases by one full turn. He put his hand over his mouth. "He said it twice, sir. He wanted to make sure I heard him. I heard him." "Why didn't you?" he started. He stopped. He did not know how to finish the sentence. There were a lot of ways to finish it. "I was in Landstuhl, sir. We took a round on the way out. My co-pilot got us home. He flew us back with both engines on fire and me unconscious in the front seat. I missed the funeral. I wrote your wife a letter. I don't know if she got it." "She got it." The colonel's voice was very small. "She read it every night for a year. She kept it in the drawer next to the bed." "How is she, sir?" He shook his head. He couldn't say it. I understood. I reached out just once and I put my hand on his sleeve, on the blue wool above the gold braid, and I held it there for the count of 3. Then I let go. The younger aviator was staring at the floor. The other officer had quietly turned his back and was pretending to look out the window, giving us the kind of privacy you can only give in a public room. From across the rotunda, I could see the Army Chief of Staff coming our way with a colonel in tow, ready to herd the inductees toward the auditorium. "Colonel," I said, "I'm going to step away for a minute. I need to check my dog." "Major." His voice caught. "Breyer." "I know, sir, what I said about the chauffeurs. I didn't." "I know," I said. "I know what you didn't mean." I walked out of the rotunda with Bo beside me. I walked down a hallway lined with photographs of helicopters in flight, of men in flight suits, of one woman in a flight suit, a chief warrant officer named Cornelia, who'd flown medevac in the First Gulf War, who I'd never met but whose picture I'd looked at sometimes when I was a lieutenant and needed to remember it could be done. I found a bench in a quiet alcove and I sat on it. Bo put his head on my knee. I put my hand on his head. He breathed slow on purpose, which is another thing he is trained for. I sat there for about 4 minutes. I did not cry. I had used up my crying about Tate Whitlock in a hospital bed in Germany 4 years before, and I had used up the rest of it on the kitchen floor of a 1-bedroom apartment in Clarksville, Tennessee. And I did not have any left to spend on a man in dress blues with his pale eyes wet in a rotunda in Fort Belvoir. What I had instead was a clean kind of stillness, the way the cockpit goes quiet when the rotor stops. A young captain came down the hall. She was in her dress uniform and she was carrying a clipboard. She found me on the bench and she said, "Ma'am, we're ready for you. Are you all right?" I stood up. I said I was. The ceremony was in the small auditorium off the rotunda. 3 inductees. A Chinook pilot from Vietnam, posthumous, his widow in the front row in a green dress. A medevac warrant officer from Iraq, retired colonel now, white hair, wheelchair, and me. The chief of staff read my citation. He read it the way you're supposed to read citations, in the slow, flat voice that does not editorialize. He read about the dust storm and the convoy and the 17 men on the ground and the 2 Apaches and the cannon rounds expended and the hours on station and the casualties evacuated and the round that came through the cockpit and what it had broken and what it had not. He read it for about 3 minutes. When he was done, the room stood up, all of them at once, 150 officers in dress blues, and they clapped, and the sound of it filled the small auditorium and bounced off the wood paneling and came back at me like weather. I looked for the colonel in the 3rd row, where I'd seen him sit. He was on his feet. He was clapping. His pale eyes were on me, and they were no longer wet. They were the eyes of a man who has been given something he did not know he was allowed to want. After the ceremony, there was another reception. I shook a lot of hands. People said kind things. A senator from Kentucky, who I'd never voted for, shook my hand and said her son was a Black Hawk pilot at Campbell, and she'd been hearing my name in his letters for years. The Chinook widow hugged me and said her husband would have liked me. The retired warrant officer in the wheelchair grabbed my forearm with a grip like a vise and said, "You keep doing what you're doing, kid. I'm 33 years old." He called me kid. I liked it. The colonel came up to me last. He waited until the line was gone. He was holding his cap under his arm. "Major Breyer." "Colonel." "I owe you an apology." "You don't, sir." "I do. Not just for today. For a lot of days." I looked at him. I thought about what to say. The room was quieter now, most of the brass clearing out, and the late afternoon sun was coming in through the tall windows in long gold bars across the marble floor. "Sir," I said, "your boy was on my net for 40 minutes. He never raised his voice. He called for his sister twice, near the end. He called for his mother once. He talked to me the rest of the time. He was where he was supposed to be. He knew it. He wanted you to know it. I have spent 4 years carrying his last words because there was nobody to give them to. If you'll have them, sir, they're yours." He nodded. He could not speak. "There's one more thing," I said. "He told me a joke." About 30 seconds before he died. I'd been trying to keep him talking. He told me a joke about a ranger and a marine in a bar in Tacoma. It wasn't a very good joke, but he laughed when he told it. He laughed, sir. I want you to know that. He laughed. The colonel put his hand to his face. He turned away from me just for a second, and then he turned back, and his eyes were dry, and he held out his hand. I took it. He held on. He held on for a long time. "What's the joke?" he said. I told him the joke. It wasn't a very good joke. He laughed anyway. He laughed the way Tate had laughed on the radio, short and surprised, like the laugh had snuck up on him. When he was done laughing, he looked at me and he said, "My wife is going to want to meet you." "I'd like that, sir." "Patricia?" "Her name is Patricia. She's at the Hampton Inn." I could. "I'm staying at the Hampton Inn, sir." He laughed again. This time the laugh had something else in it. Something lighter. "Of course you are," he said. "Of course you are, Major Reaper 6. I drove back to my hotel with Bo on the passenger seat. I sat in the parking lot for a minute before I went in. The sun was going down behind the trees on the western side of Route 1, and the sky over Virginia was the kind of pink that doesn't happen in Texas. Soft and even all the way across. I thought about Tate Whitlock. I thought about his father in dress blues with the pale eyes. I thought about the joke about the ranger and the marine in the bar in Tacoma, and how I had carried it for 4 years like a small heavy stone in my pocket, and how it was not in my pocket anymore. I met Patricia Whitlock in the lobby of the Hampton Inn at 7 that night. She was a small woman in a navy blue dress and pearl earrings, with her son's pale eyes and her husband's careful posture. She hugged me before she said anything. She held on a long time, the way her husband had held my hand. When she let go, she said, "You wrote me a letter." I said I had. She said, "I want to tell you what it meant to me." We sat in the lobby for 3 hours. The colonel sat across from us with his hands folded in his lap, and he did not say much. Bo slept on my foot. Patricia told me about Tate as a boy, and about Tate as a man, and about the night they got the news, and about the years that came after, and about the letter, which she still had in the drawer next to the bed. She asked me about my mother. She asked me about my leg. She asked me if I was eating enough. The colonel snorted at that one. I said I was. She didn't believe me. She said she was sending me a casserole. When I drove back to Clarksville 2 days later, there was a casserole in a cooler in my back seat. Beef and noodles. Patricia Whitlock's mother's recipe, she said. Tate had loved it. She'd written the instructions on an index card in her round, careful handwriting and tucked it under the foil. I ate it on a Wednesday night, alone at my kitchen table, with Bo lying under the table on my foot. It was the best thing I had eaten in 4 years. The Army Aviation Museum put my flight suit in a case in the rotunda, next to a piece of the Apache I'd been flying that night, which they'd cut out of the airframe before they scrapped it. The piece has the cockpit number on it. It also has, in faded black Sharpie under the number, the word Reaper, which I'd written there myself in 2019 because the crew chiefs had teased me about the call sign and I'd wanted to own it. The Whitlocks sent me a Christmas card that year. They have sent me one every year since. The colonel signed his name as Mike at the bottom of the first one. By the second one, he was signing it, Dad, with a question mark after it, like he was asking permission. I wrote Dad back, no question mark, and after that he stopped putting the question mark. I still hear the joke about the Ranger and the Marine in the bar in Tacoma. I hear it in Tate's voice. I hear it on bad nights, and I hear it on good ones. I used to think it was a haunting. I don't think that anymore. I think it's a gift. The kind you don't ask for and don't deserve and can't refuse. And the only thing you can do with it is hold it carefully and pass it on when you can and try to be worthy of the man who told it to you. Reaper 6. Out. I've thought a lot about that rotunda, about the colonel's pale eyes and the way his glass stopped on the way to his mouth, about how a man can spend a whole career building a wall around the part of him that hurts, and how one word, said at the right volume on the right afternoon, can take that wall down without breaking it. The thing I keep coming back to is this. Mike Whitlock didn't say what he said because he was cruel. He said it because he was tired and proud and full of a grief he didn't have anywhere to put. He buried a son, and the world had moved on, and somewhere along the way he decided that the only honest work in war was the work done on the ground, because that was the work his boy had been doing when his boy was killed. It was easier to believe that than to believe his son had died believing in me. I understand that. I would have built the same wall. What I've learned, sitting alone at my kitchen table with Bo on my foot and the years between me and that night growing longer, is that you don't get to choose when the universe asks you to be the bigger person. It asks you when you're the most tired. It asks you when you're the most justified in being small. It asked me in a rotunda when I had every right to put a man in his place in front of 100 officers, and the only reason I didn't is that I'd been carrying Tate's last words for 4 years, and I knew, the second I heard his father's laugh, that those words belonged to him more than they belonged to me. There's a kind of strength that has nothing to do with how loud you can be. It's the strength of holding something heavy without showing the strain. Tate had it the night he died, when he made sure his voice stayed level on the radio so I wouldn't lose my nerve. His father had it too, when he stood up in the third row and clapped for the woman he'd just called a chauffeur. I think that's the inheritance Tate left both of us. The capacity to keep working when the easy thing would be to quit. If I could tell my younger self one thing, it would be this. The world will try to make you small. Sometimes it will be a colonel in dress blues. Sometimes it will be a recruiter or a doctor, or the voice in your own head at 3 in the morning. You don't answer that by getting louder. You answer it by getting better. You answer it by doing the work every day until the work itself is the answer. Tate told me a joke 30 seconds before he died. It wasn't a very good joke. But he told it because he wanted to laugh one more time, and he wanted me to laugh with him, and he wanted his father to know, someday, that the last thing he did was laugh. That's the whole thing, I think. That's the whole job. You do the work. You tell the joke. You pass it on.